A topic I saw yesterday, and I started to read it. ESPN, the magazine, had an expose on the Seattle Seahawks and how they really haven't come back from that loss to the Patriots, the interception by Malcolm Butler, Richard Sherman drama. There's a whole lot going on in this article. And I don't know if you separate fact from fiction and what's real and is it really serious and do they want to trade Richard Sherman and is this going to be a problem? Bob Condotta, who covers the Seahawks for the Seattle Times, joins us now. Bob, can you separate sort of fact from fiction if you're given the Cliff Notes version of what are we looking at right now with the Seattle Seahawks?
Well, I mean, I think there's a lot of fact in there. I guess it's a how much does each fact matter, and so much of this is a matter of perception and the individual people involved. I think the idea that that Super Bowl loss still hangs over Richard Sherman quite a bit. I think there's a lot of accuracy to that. Whether it hangs over every single guy, Bobby Wagner and Cam Chancellor and all those guys the same, probably not. I think Richard takes things much more internally and personally maybe than a lot of other guys on the team. In terms of trading Richard, I mean, anyone who really followed the Seahawks last year would understand what sort of led to that. I mean, there was a number of incidents. I mean, 2 really got a lot of publicity, but there were 4, 5, 6 others that maybe from a national standpoint did not, that I think to the organization were also, sort of illuminating, I guess. And so the idea of, as John Schneider, the general manager, said a little while ago, maybe Richard having a fresh start somewhere else might not have been the worst thing. I don't think they were looking to trade him like they just wanted to get rid of him, like it's a trade deadline and you're just dumping a guy. They were not ever wanting to do that, but they were exploring the idea. And if they could have gotten the right price, I think they would have been open to it. And, he's 29 years old. He has 2 years left on his contract. This time next year, with either the Seahawks or someone else, he's going to be asking for one last really big deal. And, the Seahawks might be looking down that road and thinking that might not be with us. So if we could have sort of gotten ahead of the curve there and gotten something for him before we might get to a point where we might lose him and might not get anything, I think that's part of what they were looking at as well.
But in this article, ESPN the magazine, Seth Wickersham's article, there's a lot of things here that feels like management sides more with Russell Wilson. That we put the defense, expect more out of the defense than we do the offense. You got Sherman still upset with the play calling and, why don't we just run the football? Why didn't we run the football? Richard Sherman calling out Russell Wilson during practice after picking off one of his passes. Pete Carroll sitting down with Richard Sherman. I don't know if this is normal for other franchises here, but I'm just curious. Is the atmosphere always like this with the Seahawks?
Well, and I thought the article was great. I'm always hesitant to comment on things other people wrote because I don't know who told them what and things like that. The only thing I thought got misperceived to me a little bit from the article was what you mentioned about Richard calling out Russell in a practice. I mean, that was 3 years ago. That was after they'd won the Super Bowl and before the pass against, before the Super Bowl against the Patriots. And that was a practice we all saw and was very well chronicled at the time because the Seahawks ended up getting penalized for that. And that was a crazy practice where guys got hurt and there was an awful lot of offense-defense stuff. And at the time, I think we all viewed that incident with Russell and Richard, which we all saw and people wrote about it at the time, as more of an offense-defense thing because there'd been all this back and forth and a couple of fights, offense and defense and stuff like that. But that was, basically the first time they were on the field after having beaten Denver in the Super Bowl. So I thought it was a little bit of a stretch to associate that with what's going on now. But it did do a good job of, I thought, sort of giving that character of what practices are like there. And, Pete likes that. Pete Carroll is always like that sort of living on the edge kind of thing and encouraging guys to do that in practice. Some of the other stuff, I mean, the offense, there's no question. I think the defense is, the defense for 4 straight years allowed the fewest points in the NFL. They did something that only basically one other defense in the entire history of the NFL has ever done. So I think there's always maybe a little bit of that, who gets credit for what kind of thing. Everybody sort of has that human nature, but the offense basically has set every single offensive record that there could be as well during Russell's time. I mean, most points, most yards, most passing yards. Just about everything. So, I don't think it's fair to say that the defense has just carried the offense the whole time. Certainly last year, the offense had a lot of issues, and that's when a lot of this stuff came to a head. And I do think some of the defensive guys, they got to a point last year where they did feel like everything that was going on offensively was going to drag the team down a little bit. But, it wasn't all Russell Wilson's fault. I mean, they had, everybody everywhere, I think, says their offensive line was the worst in the NFL. And
is he well liked, though?
That were going on.
Is Russell Wilson liked by his teammates?
I think in general he is. I think with guys who've been there, I think all relationships change over time. And, so I think everybody, I mean, is every coworker, universally liked by their coworkers? I don't know if that's ever the case. I think in Russell's case, I think everybody respects the heck out of him and realizes he's by far, he's the best quarterback they could have for this team right now. And, especially with the way it's structured and all of that. So, I think Russell, is he a little different, and is he? I think he's maybe gotten a little bit removed from guys as things have gone on, and in the off seasons he's maybe not as around as much sometimes as he had been in the past, and there's some family dynamics like that changed through the time.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't think Sherman's there too much longer, but the salary contract issue is certainly hanging over both of those. And if he wants to go to New England, kind of hard to send him to New England, given that contract there. But I guess they'll coexist. But it feels like Richard Sherman this past year, and I thought he talked a whole lot more than he ever has, and I don't think he backed it up this past year, whether he was hiding injury or not. But it's a fascinating team. It really is. And the window is still there. Let me ask you this before I say goodbye. Colin Kaepernick working out, does it feel like they found their backup quarterback?
I'm not sure yet. I think they also brought in Austin Davis, which is significant because I don't think, even though all the emphasis media-wise is on Colin Kaepernick, they're looking at other guys as well. And I think it's going to come down as much as to money and things like that as anything. And that's where Russell's contract, which now, it's going up and up. It's going to be $23 million here in a couple of years. They want to go as cheaply as possible as they can for a backup because Russell has been so durable. Mm-hmm. But last year he did have some injuries, and I think they wanted to cover themselves a little bit more and try to bring in a veteran of some sort. And
will there be any local reaction? Will there be local reaction, Bob, to Kaepernick if he goes to the team?
You mean among fan bases? Yeah. I mean, sure, but. Seattle is maybe as amenable to that, I guess, politically as anywhere, given the way the numbers went in terms of who voted for who and things like that. If you're looking at it along those kind of lines, sure, there would be, but he'd be a backup quarterback. He's not contending to start, and so I don't know how much do you worry about the backup quarterback from that standpoint. I think the Seahawks have in general not cared about that kind of stuff as much as maybe as some other teams, but I think a lot of it is going to come down to that. I mean, if Kaepernick really wants still any sort of significant money, I think that would be a deal breaker for the Seahawks because I don't think they want to pay much money to a guy they are hoping would never take the field.
Bob, always interesting there. Thanks for joining us.
All right, thank you.
That's Bob Condotta, the Seattle Times Seahawks reporter.
The Dan Patrick Show, weekday mornings on Audience.